So we've got a few minutes before we get started. I see a lot of new faces here, a lot of new faces. So I want to welcome anyone who's come for the first time. And why don't we just get up, stand up, and go meet someone that you've not known before. And if you're brand new, it might be whoops. Okay, why don't we, if you will, be seated. Great, wonderful. Again, good morning, everyone. My name is Lama Tom Broadwater. I'm very happy to see so many here today, and particularly those who are brand new. Welcome. So how we'll begin today is taking refuge. If you're not of a mind to follow this Buddhist prayer, that's no problem. You can just sort of simply rest your mind, relax. Otherwise, we'll say the prayer. It's the refuge prayer. Guess I'll need these. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Thank you. So again, welcome. Glad to see you all here on a beautiful day today. So for the last 3 months, I've been teaching about what's called the 6 paramitas, which are basically virtues. And they are called paramitas because in Sanskrit, that's the word means far shore. So they take us to the far, they are behaviors that take us to the far shore of enlightenment. So far, I've covered generosity and moral conduct or discipline. And so today, I'm going to look at the virtue of patience, something we probably all need at one time or another. As I look back over the last 2 months that I taught, I never really put these virtues within the context of the Buddhist path. So I'm going to do that today. I will start at the beginning, you might say, of the Buddhist path and take us up to these virtues. And also, I'll briefly review the past virtues that we talked about. I don't have a lot of stories to tell you today, so you're going to have to sort of pay a particular attention. So I'm asking for your attention today, despite the fact that I'm not going to be able to tell a lot of funny stories. Maybe next time. Patience isn't terribly funny, I guess. I suppose it could be. So I've used 3 books to deliver these talks. One is called The Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Trungpa Rinpoche. Wonderful book. He's just recently passed. Great commentator, easy to understand. So that's one book. The other book's a little harder to digest. It's called The Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gompopa. A little harder to understand. So if you want to choose a book first, I would choose Trungpa Rinpoche's book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, excuse me. And finally, I've used this book, which is Dharma Paths, a wonderful book. The reason I say that is, you know, I've been a Buddhist for the past 20 years, and every time I go to this book, something new pops out that's very profound. So it's always it's a great primer, you might say. So I recommend that book. And in fact, today, most of what I'm going to talk about comes from this book. I've covered about 100 pages of this book, and I'm going to do that in a 45-minute talk. So what I've had to do is excerpt part of it. A lot of it is therefore redacted. You have to read the book to get the whole story. And if there's anything good that I say today, it is directly from this book. I rarely say anything profound or wonderful, but Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who was my teacher, who passed away just a few years ago at 94, he does say things that are really profound, direct, and clear. So again, I will be using most of Dharma Paths as my reference. So let's start at the beginning and provide some definition of what the Buddhist path is. So there's a number of ways we could describe it, but what makes sense is to call Buddhism is a collection of various skillful means. Methods, if we understand and if we apply them and integrate them into our lives, develop us to our full potential, our minds to our full potential. Very simple definition. Ways to help us develop our minds to their full potential. It's all about our mind. Buddhism is all about our mind. And Buddhist teachings are aimed at taming that mind and then training it. First, we got to tame it, and that's through meditation. We got to tame it, and then we train it. And we train in the virtues that we're going to talk about. You might say our minds are being trained to develop greater insight and to begin to remove those habitual, neurotic, emotional patterns that are obstacles to our insight. I don't know about you, but I have a little bit of neurosis. I have a little bit of craziness. I color my world with my own perceptions of things. And Buddhism is there to help us to purify our minds of those kinds of obstacles. And if you look, those neurotic tendencies, those afflictive emotions can be pretty chaotic and can be pretty intense. And through the practice, the Buddhist path, we try to pacify those by the practice of the teachings. And so, if we do, our confusion and our restlessness gradually recede as a part of this path. So in this respect, the teachings of the Buddha relate to the most fundamental aspects of our intellectual and emotional lives. As Rinpoche says in this book, and every time I say Rinpoche, I'm talking about Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. So as Rinpoche says, everyone can benefit from the teachings. You don't have to be Buddhist to benefit. He says it's like water. Water quenches your thirst, whoever you are. And it's the same thing with Dharma. Dharma being the teachings, can help anybody. Just like water can quench anybody's thirst. The benefits of Dharma, there we go. The benefits of Dharma depend upon our sincerity and our diligence. That's the only thing that is different from us than those that are realized beings. They were more sincere and more diligent in their practice. I tend to be fairly lazy, so I don't make a lot of progress. But if you're diligent and if you're sincere, you will make progress. The idea here is that we all need to make a change in the states of our minds. Anybody disagree with that? We all need a change in the way our mind operates. I don't know about you, but we're often distracted and externally oriented, and we don't, in that process, even take small glimpses to look at our own minds. Buddhism calls us to start looking at our own minds and what's that all about. And there are things we should look at and take responsibility for. Things like our aggression, our pride, our jealousy, our attachment, neurotic attachments, our frustration, our fears, our restlessness. We need to look at that. That's an inside look. Certainly, when these crowd into our lives, when these afflictive emotions crowd into our lives, Rinpoche says it's sort of like lying on a bed of thorns. It's always a little yucky. So the change we are looking for has to come from within us, and that is the call of our Buddhist practice, to start looking within ourselves, and that's where real change begins. The good news here is that no matter how angry or how aggressive, how fraught you are with afflictive emotions and neurosis, there is in each one of us an element of gentleness, tenderness, and sanity. It gets obscured. We don't always see it. And through practice, we start seeing that, uncovering that gentleness, that sanity. The teachings are aimed at developing that. The Buddha said he could show us the way. He could show us the way out of these states. But all of us, if we want that, have to make effort, we have to be diligent, and we have to be devoted to it. So if we know that we have these afflictive states, that means actually we have some wisdom. That's the beginning. I'm like this. I recognize it. That's the wisdom part of your own mind, recognizing that. And the teachings show us how to remove that aggression by the practice of compassion. we remove jealousy by rejoicing in the good fortune of others. I don't know about you, but when someone makes progress or does something really great, I'm often catching my mind saying, they didn't deserve that. I should be in that place. I deserve that prize. The teachings say that, and we know that makes us really feel awful. It's like lying on a bed of thorns, this jealousy. And the remedy to that is actually rejoicing in someone else's good fortune. I am so happy you got that promotion. Maybe at first it doesn't sound authentic, but you develop that. It's a practice of wishing people well who have done well. So the first formal step that many people take on this Buddhist path is refuge. And it's called Refuge in the Three Jewels. We took refuge when we started this morning. The three jewels being the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, basically those spiritual friends and teachers who've maintained an unbroken line with the Dharma. Also, when we take that vow, that refuge vow, we can also take some other lay vows. And I talked about that last month. I won't talk about it this month. Basically, they help to stabilize our commitment. On this path, it's really important we develop our meditational skills. This practice is developed through consistent practice. It takes a long time. You know, if you're a beginning meditator, your mind's pretty wild, pretty chaotic. That's normal. I remember my daughter, who's not Buddhist, I taught her how to practice meditation. And she came back to me and she said, Dad, my mind's too crazy. I can't do this. Everyone feels that way. And that's not an obstacle. In fact, that's progress. That's recognizing what's going on in your mind as maybe you never did before. So shamatha, which is simple meditation, is the beginning of our effort. But it's not the final goal. Shamatha lays the ground for what's called vipassana, which is insight into the very nature of ourselves and things. And that's down the road. This vipassana is also sometimes called a panoramic awareness, an ability to see things as they are, the panorama of reality. It basically means being able to see beyond mere appearances. At this point in our journey, we can enter the path of the Bodhisattva. Now, what's a Bodhisattva? It's basically someone who makes effort to practice virtue for the benefit of all beings. Not just, we begin, most of us begin this journey, this path, needing to work on ourselves, really. I mean, this is where we start, and there's no problem with that. But at some point, when we have a little bit of stability, we start looking around us, and we see all this suffering in the world. And because of our practice, we start to begin to have love and compassion for all beings, because all beings suffer. And maybe we can't do a great deal at the moment. We want to at least aspire to be helpful to other beings. And this is basically the Bodhisattva vow. So we generate what's called bodhicitta, an enlightened heart, an enlightened mind for the benefit of other beings. Again, with bodhicitta, we see everybody around us suffers. And everybody, just look around, everybody's caught up in a bit of confusion, ourselves included, and some ignorance, ourselves included. So with this bodhisattva vow, this vow to have an enlightened heart and mind, we vow to help them, to lessen their pain, and ultimately, we want to help them to transcend their suffering altogether. If we have this enlightened attitude, we are awakened. We are awakened to travel the path of the bodhisattva. And the most effective way to travel this Buddhist path is the path of the bodhisattva. And we generate this enlightened attitude for the benefit of all beings. This attitude, there is a continuity of this attitude from the point of making that vow until we finally reach Buddhahood, whenever that may be. We always maintain this desire, this aspiration to help other beings. It's what we do from now on. In fact, Rinpoche has said that without this attitude, no matter how advanced our practices are, they will be ineffective in removing our neurotic patterns and lead to enlightenment. So we have to have that attitude if we want to travel this road. So on the path of the Bodhisattva, we develop certain practices. And these practices are called paramitas. I mentioned that in the beginning. Paramita meaning those behaviors, those attitudes that lead us to the far shore of enlightenment. So they are listed as generosity, moral ethics, discipline, patience, enthusiastic effort, meditation, and wisdom. Those are the 6 paramitas. And like I said, I've already talked about generosity and moral ethics. I'll give a brief summary of that talk in a few words and say generosity can best be expressed. There's many ways to express it. For example, if you give monetarily to the center, that's generosity. By the way, there's that little red box back there, and if you ever want to put a few nickels and dimes or dollars in there for the benefit of, we have to keep the lights on, so that would help. So that's part of generosity. But there's also a generosity expressed in helping others in need. The fact is that sometimes people, we know this, sometimes people use power to frighten, to harm and torture other people. We know that. So we try to give refuge, we try to give help, we try to be generous to those victims of that sort of power play. Another way we can give generously is when we see someone sick or mourning, giving your attention. That's the most valuable thing you can give most people is your attention. That's being generous. That's part of the Bodhisattva path, being generous, giving your attention to others. And another way we can do this is by making the teachings available to other people. But here's the deal. Rinpoche said, what counts is not how much we know, but how correctly we know it. So even though you may just know a little bit, if you know that well and you know that correctly, you can give that to another. But we have to be careful. If if we're a little fuzzy on things, we probably shouldn't be talking or trying to instruct another person about it. But if you know something of the teachings and you want to give that to another person, that's being generous. And last month's topic was about the virtue of moral ethics. It can be summarized in just a few words. Moral ethics, according to Buddhist practitioners, is basically we try to avoid harm, we try to avoid harming others, we try to avoid harming ourselves, we do as much virtue as we can, and we observe whatever precepts we have vowed to uphold. That's morality, a very simple explanation of Buddhist morality. Now we come to today's topic, which is patience. The simple definition of patience is having an undisturbed mind and the absence of retaliatory reactions. I'll say that again. Patience is an undisturbed mind and the absence of a retaliatory reaction. We don't react. We just let the mind remain relaxed without immediately thinking about taking a retaliatory action. We do our best to consider that whatever harm has been done to us is over, is done, it's finished. I don't know about you, but if I think about it and go down that rabbit hole, it may be a day, it may be a week, it may be a month, it may be a year of misery of my thinking over and over again how I've been mistreated. I've done that. As they say, I've been there, done that. So a close cousin to anger is resentment. And we can harbor those for a long time. Patience tells us to maintain an undisturbed mind. It's done, it's over with, it's finished. And not thinking in terms of retaliating. So you might say patience, in essence, is not brooding over what has been done to us, but just leave it and forget about it. Sometimes hard. That's why it's called practice, right? It's not always easy. It's practice. So, according to Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, there are 3 categories for patience. The first is having patience with various problems we face every day. In everyday life, obstacles come up in our path. When we want to get something done, something arises that's an obstacle to our objective of whatever we want to accomplish. The second one is having patience in the practice of Dharma. That's sort of like, I guess you already see that. I mean, patience is hard. And so we have to be patient with our impatience. And we practice to the point where we have genuine experience and confidence. So at first, that might be a little tentative, my acts of patience. But we keep practicing it until we have this genuine experience of being patient and having confidence in that as the right approach. So first, everyday life. Secondly, practice. And the third is having patience and tolerance when other people hurt us. So let's look at the first, patience in everyday life. Sometimes we think that the spiritual is over here and our everyday life is over there. 2 different realms that never intersect. For sure, we will always and everywhere be involved and engrossed in everyday affairs and pleasures. But if we become so engrossed in them, we won't be able to get any understanding of the spiritual. So we have to balance that. But we want to bring the spiritual into our everyday lives. That's where we spend most of our time. That's where our mind is most of the time. So we want to bring the teachings into our everyday lives. In this case, through the practice of patience. So the problem is we sometimes lack this openness, this mindfulness. You have to remember. That's mindfulness. I have to remember sometimes to be patient. And I have to apply my intelligence sometimes as to how do I act patiently in this situation. So as we work with our minds in Dharma, we begin to appreciate how trivial many of our concerns are. I mean, I don't know. I'm sometimes around folks and I say, boy, they're really getting upset over nothing. A couple of months ago, I was I guess for him it was not a small problem, but we were in an airport. I guess I am telling some stories here now, off the cuff. So I was in an airport, and the plane was delayed. And this one fella was pacing back and forth as if he were the only one being delayed. There's a whole plane load of people being delayed. And he was, cussing and complaining, and he went up a couple times to the counter and said, when are we getting out of here, and blah, 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 blah. I had the misfortune, perhaps, of having to sit next to him in the plane and listen further to his complaints about stuff. I think we were late maybe an hour, I don't know. And maybe it was just me, but I had the perspective that this is pretty not big deal. Now, it was to him, I have to admit that, but sometimes in the practice of Dharma and putting it into our lives, we sometimes recognize the triviality of so much that we get all upset about. And it's not because someone has commanded us to do it. No one is going to command you to be patient. What we start to see is that it's just a more efficient way of dealing with things. So maybe this being impatient sounds familiar. But let's look at it another way. How many times have we failed to succeed because we lacked patience? So I can think of any number of things that I lack patience in. And so my story is, I begin with one thing, get frustrated, begin another thing, drop it because I'm distracted, and then fiddle with something else. And then I start to realize that, I start to be frustrated because I start to realize that I started all these projects and completed none of them. Why? Because I lack patience. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? So it does have practical applications in everyday life. It's bringing the spiritual into our everyday lives. We're going to encounter disappointments every day. Often, when things go wrong, even just a little bit wrong, we lack patience. And that has a snowballing effect, making management of those difficulties even less possible. We sabotage ourselves with our lack of patience. Here's what Rinpoche says. He says, if we have a strong desire to benefit others, we need to have an air of gentleness, tolerance, and patience. As we practice the Dharma, he says, we bring a firmness to that gentleness. I'm determined. I'm firm about, I want to be patient. So he says if we practice long enough, we realize we have to bring a firmness to that gentleness. And as a result, if we do, as he says, we are able to tolerate difficulties and interference. So now let's talk about the practice of Dharma and having to be patient there. I talked about this with our noonday class this morning. The fact is, spiritual practice is difficult. It's more difficult than any mundane worldly practice we can involve in, especially in the beginning. We may think that the teachings are too profound, too subtle, too deep for us to understand. And right here in the beginning, we fear we won't ever make progress. I mean, enlightenment is so far away, right? Is it? Enlightenment, awakening, is sort of like, do you ever dream? Yeah. I dream. I don't do lucid dreams, but I do dream. And when I wake up afterwards, I say, oh my gosh, how involved I was in that. And it's all a dream. The same thing can happen in everyday life. We get so involved in something, and then all of a sudden we say, how trivial that was. Sort of wake up to that fact. So in little ways, every day, we can wake up a little bit. So in that respect, enlightenment is not so far away. It can happen in little glimpses every day. I got off the subject, sorry. But again, in the beginning, we have to be patient with ourselves in the practice of Dharma. It's difficult work. Working with our mind is difficult. We have habits, and habits, as we all know, are hard to break. But I think most of us who've practiced for a while recognize that it's worth trying. Even a little effort can produce some benefit. So now let's look at the third aspect of patience. This is the patience when others harm us. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche talked and wrote extensively about this. In practicing patience, when someone harms us, we have to be not motivated for revenge. Sometimes, even if we don't retaliate, as we said, we may retain this desire to retaliate, and that causes us all kinds of mental problems and harms to ourselves. But with patience, we at least don't plot revenge. Shantideva, he was an 8th century Buddhist saint, had advice for us in Guide to the Way of the Bodhisattva. And he said we should see those who want to harm us as confused and ignorant. They are, how does he say? They are not free. They are under the spell of anger, ignorance, and confusion. So the enemy is not that person. The enemy is anger, confusion. Certainly we want to protect ourselves from such anger, but we have the additional responsibility, besides protecting ourselves, of doing no harm. Aggression destroys lives and happiness. I've been reading, I love podcasts. I've been reading or listening to one about the history, particularly of slavery. The amount of cruelty. It's just unbelievable. Aggression destroys lives and our happiness. So we have to control our minds in that regard, to train our minds to control that aggression. Otherwise, we place ourselves in a hellish realm. And we can put others in that same realm. If someone robs us or causes us physical harm, there can actually be a reason for our anger. It's not the wisest and most beneficial thing to do, but at least there is a certain logic to it. But let's face it, most of the time, we don't have these kind of dramatic circumstances where we're being robbed, physical harm coming to us, and we don't have that sort of rationale for anger. Let's take a for instance. For instance, someone calls you stupid and a terrible person. What would that do? What reaction might you have with that? You're stupid. You're a terrible person. Well, most of us would instantly become overwhelmed and overwhelmed with anger. The question is, have they caused me death? Have they robbed me? Have they caused me physical harm? No. What have they done? They've hurt my pride, right? And as a result, there is what you might call a narcissistic rage that arises within us. How dare you? We can make a mindful choice to tolerate that insult. After all, we don't need somebody else's praise or attention, and we certainly don't need it from everybody. Our behavior and our lack of retaliation will determine whether we are stupid or terrible, not that other person's label of us. Let's also consider that people sometimes tell us uncomfortable truths about ourselves. And we have to accept that, respect that. But so often we get angry because we don't want to deal with what we find uncomfortable within ourselves, uncomfortable truths. Aggression and its first cousin, resentment, are deeply ingrained in us. So this is a long-term project, but it's possible to change. After all, there's nothing more changeable in our minds. One time we're happy, next time we're sad, next moment we're raging, next time we're pacified. The mind changes all the time. This transition from aggression to patience is not magical, and it's not mystical. We just have to become convinced of the pointlessness of aggression and resentment and projecting those patterns and becoming overwhelmed by them. We have to take personal and individual responsibility. What happens is aggression blinds us. And in that blindness, we see the faults of others and don't see our own. If we have bad eyesight, we see in a distorted way. We think that something's wrong with what we're seeing. But of course, there's nothing wrong with what's there. It's our eyes that are bad. You may at this point say, well, this all sounds very good, but it's not realistic. In essence, what we are saying is that we cannot change. But again, if anything can change, it's certainly our minds. Non-aggression is possible. We can train our minds toward that. We all know right now the world, our country, is in enormous confusion. No one would, I doubt anyone here would dispute that. There's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of conflict. And the sad thing is, aggression can be very contagious. And certainly when there are a lot of aggressive people congregated together, anger, conflict, and chaos is almost inevitable. Again, looking at history, there is nothing, or our own lives, there's nothing more terrible than, or demonic than our own aggression and the aggression of others. So in these situations, training our minds to be peaceful will help more than just our talking about peace. We can talk about peace, as my grandmother says, till the cows come home. But what's going to be effective if we start to bring peace into our own lives? So what we can do is at least begin envisioning helping others in ultimate ways through our practice of patience. So the question is, what do we do right now? What do we do right now? When do we start? And where do we start? Right now and here. Let's start right now and here. Our challenge is to help form a community where we live and in the here and in the now. How about this community, this little community called Columbus KTC? How about this community resolving to practice the virtues, particularly patience, as best we can? How about we as a community listen, think, and practice what our great teachers have taught us? What if those in this community treated each other with intentional respect, love, and compassion? And all people. What if we did that? What if each of us did that without the least bit of arrogance, but with humility and simplicity? Again, there's nothing mystical or magical about this. It's plain, mindful practice of the paramitas, the virtues that lead us to the other shore. So in this respect, our Buddhist practice can help us integrate within the larger community and society and be more responsive as people. It's something we're capable of if we have patience. As Rinpoche says, if we practice patience, we won't have to ask to be accepted. Everyone will long for our presence because we are patient. And it's not because we expect it from others. It's not because we competed for favor with them. We will be welcomed because that's the nature of patience. I'll return to what I said in the very beginning to close out here. And we will have a few moments if we want to ask questions. So I'll end as I began, to lay the groundwork. Before we train our mind in virtue, we must also tame it. Meditation is important. We can add patience to our practice of sitting meditation. So until we develop a tranquil, clear, and calm mind and some degree of patience and tolerance, whatever other practices we do, they will not be effective until we have developed a calm, clear, patient mind. Our lineage masters say, patience is a beautiful ornament that we wear. It brings beauty and dignity to our lives. Thank you for listening to this morning's talk. I really appreciate it. I looked around and I didn't see anyone fall asleep, which is a good sign. So again, thank you. We have time for questions, and particularly be interested, maybe someone who's visiting the place for the first time, if they have questions. There's microphones on either side, and please make yourself available. And because my hearing is so bad, if you can speak slowly and distinctly, that will help me a lot.
Hi, Lama Tom. Thank you for your teaching today. I have two questions for you. First is certainly letting go and not holding on to retributive thoughts is on the journey of practicing patience. But is the goal to cultivate a mind that does not have those thoughts in the first place?
Surely, of course.
Okay.
What you say is true. Ultimately, that's what we want. In the beginning, maybe, however, we just say to ourselves, at least I'm not going to do any harm. And I work with this retaliatory mind, this resentful mind. That can take time. There's practices called Tonglen where, and this is really good, particularly where you have someone that you're in conflict with. You recognize their confusion. You recognize their anger. And because you have this open heart, this loving heart, you're willing to take it on in the form of your breath. You just take it in. And you give out your kindness. Over time, that'll work because you then begin to see that enemy is not your enemy. They're just suffering like you. That takes time. It takes practice. I tell you that because a few years ago, I felt someone did something really hurtful to me. And I perseverated. I ran that over in my mind day after day after day. But I also did Tonglen. It's not magical. It's not mystical what happened. Eventually, I woke up one day. I wasn't angry. But it took time. So yeah, we want to get to that point. What I'm saying is, spiritual work sometimes hard and takes time.
Absolutely.
Second question.
Second question. So what room is there for, let's say, just retribution You know, I could think of, you know, maybe someday being a member of a jury and having to pass a guilty verdict. You know, are there certain professions like judges or police who, you know, can't follow the Buddhist teachings?
So you're asking about just retribution. There's justice. Retribution. I was reading the history of the slave uprising in Haiti. And the French who put, I hate to talk so grossly, but they literally put the slaves' heads on stakes. They called that just retribution. So we have to be careful about that. There is, I think, a justice that is helpful to that person for whom who has done wrong. I'll give you an example. It's my wife, who's a saint. It's terrible living with a saint, but she's a saint. About 4 years ago, she was hit by a drunk driver, broke almost every bone in her body on the left side. Still cannot walk well. She went to this he was a third or fourth time offender, maybe more than that. Driving without a license and had no insurance. Tell you all this. So my wife goes to, and without any prompting from me, went to his trial and at the sentencing part. And she said, I don't have any hatred towards you. I hope in prison you get help because you need help. But I want you to know what you've done to me. So, you know, I think we can ask for justice, but it's got to be skillful, it's got to be kind, and it's certainly not putting people's heads on stakes.
So, you know, I think your answer is that justice for needs of a community or society is different from retribution.
Yeah, and I think we have to look at whether our justice system is just. So we always have to be looking at that to see whether it's not biased against certain individuals, whether or not that punishment is not commensurate with what they've done. You know, there's a lot of questions these days about our justice system, and I think rightly so. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. We have time for another question.
Thank you, Lama Tom. I want to press you because I'm confused and ignorant. At 1949, Tibet, communists busted in. Some Tibetans escaped, some died. Now, over the decades, it's gotten less dangerous, less deadly. And as I understand it now, the practice of Buddhism is kind of accepted by the government. Here, the Christian nationalists are trying to control us and punish us. Now, following the model of Tibet, there'll be a very difficult time that will then clear up in decades. How do we go through that? How do we live? Or do we just accept the pain and possible death?
First of all, I'm not going to comment on politics, and for good reason. I think someone in this position, sitting here, who would combine politics and religion, create a theocracy. I'm not going to do that. So I can't really comment on those particular individuals you're singling out. The answer is in some ways simple. The answer is you have an area of influence. You know, it depends on who you are too. My area of influence is very small. Some people have more and some people have a great deal. We all have responsibilities within those areas of influence, spheres of influence. So within my sphere of influence, I'm going to try to be an example of patience, of love, of kindness, of tolerance. I'm going to do what I can. And I also, if you remember what I said in the talk, I think one of the ways we can inoculate ourselves to fear is developing community. It's the remedy most immediate for us, to develop community here and now, and to what extent we can create community in the larger society. But, you know, I'm not going to talk about politics. It's a lot of people are spending a lot of time on that. I'm not saying it's not valuable. I'm just saying I can't. I'm sorry I'm not more helpful. So our time is up. What do we do at the end? We do an act of generosity. And the act of generosity is giving away. We got some merit here. We came, we could have done anything else besides being here today, being on a golf course if some of you like golf or whatever. But you're here, and there's virtue in that. And you could leave here saying, boy, was I a good person? I did a good job. What a great thing. What we do an act of dedication. Whatever virtue, small or large, we've accumulated by being here this morning, we're going to give it away. We're going to give away open. We're just going to give it away to all beings who suffer just like us. It's an act of generosity. So let's do the dedication. And we'll do it in English. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. Again, thank you so much. And to those that are new to the center, I hope you come back and have a great week, guys. Thank you.